අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT Mobitel දේශයේ ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday the 9th of May 2023. Besmirched in history, violent riots and acts of aggression of May 9, 2022 marks 1 year today. Extensions. Indian officials extend Indian credit line of $1 billion given to Sri Lanka until March 2024. Apprehended. Main suspect involved in the death of a 16-year-old girl's death in Kaltar arrested today.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරමක්.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. Now today, the 9th of May, marks exactly 1 year since violence broke out across the country, killing one member of parliament and houses of ruling party members being torched. In this backdrop, the Colombo Ford Magistrates Court has issued a restraining order against a protest march organised today to commemorate the uproar that took place last year.
A series of mass protests sprung up in March last year against the government led by former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The government was heavily criticised for mismanaging the economy, leading to skyrocketing inflation, daily blackouts and a shortage of fuel, domestic gas and other essential goods, leaving the public in long queues for days. Demonstrations and rallies were staged across the country, and at the Goal Face Green, protesters gathered in large numbers. Thousands gathered to protest at Goal Face Promenade, turning the site into one of the largest street protests in Sri Lanka. The agitation site was dubbed Gota Gogama, which was initially set up by volunteers on the night of 9th of April with a handful of tents. Within days, the site was transformed into a village of tents, providing basic necessities including food, water and toilet facilities, as well as limited free emergency medical services to the protesters. Multiple protest sites were later set up across the country in line with the Goal Face Green site, demanding the President and Prime Minister to go home and the government to resign. Subsequently, on the 9th of May last year, supporters of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna arrived at the temple trees in buses to stage a protest urging former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa not to resign. During their protest, the former Prime Minister addressed his supporters where he announced that he was willing to make any sacrifice for the people. Chaos unleashed after the group of pro-government supporters then attacked the agitation site in front of temple trees, assaulting anti-government protesters before moving onto the larger protest site at Goal Face Green. The attacks caused widespread retaliation and riots, triggering violence across the country. The buses that were carrying the supporters who attacked the protesters were ambushed in various parts of the country and destroyed. It did not take long for the violence to spread. with the private residences and properties of ministers and parliamentarians set ablaze by mobs. The violence and destructions across the country ended with the brutal murder of a ruling party member of the parliament and his security officer in broad daylight. Polonnaruwa district MP of Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna Amarakirthi Atukorala and his personal security officer was brutally murdered in Nittambuwa amidst the unrest. In the face of the rise in tensions, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa tendered his resignation to the president. Today marks 1 year since violence broke out and houses of ruling party members were torched. In this backdrop, the Colombo Fort Magistrate Court issued a restraining order against a protest march organised today to commemorate the uproar that took place last year. The restraining order has been issued preventing the protesters from entering the President's House, Presidential Secretariat, Ministry of Finance and Temple Trees. The restraining order has been issued preventing the protesters from entering the President's House, Presidential Secretariat, Ministry of Finance and Temple Trees. With that being the case, a group preparing to mark a year since the protests was dispersed by the police at the Goldface Green today. The group then staged a protest in front of the United Nations office in Colombo. Meanwhile today, the series of incidents that took place on the 9th of May last year was brought to discussion in Parliament. A minute's silence was also observed in memory of SLPP MP Amarakirthi Atukorala. Meanwhile, a group of Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna MPs and local government representatives carried out several religious activities today.
Now, the Cabinet granted approval to a proposal presented by President Ranil Wickremesinghe to replace the existing Financial Management Responsibility Act governing state financial operations. This was proposed as the existing act does not stipulate on how the government should proceed if it fails to meet the goals set by the act in terms of state financial operations. Now, the Cabinet also granted approval to the steps taken to proceed with the $200 million loan offered by the World Bank to set up a social safety protection scheme. The Cabinet gave the go-ahead to proceed with the proposal presented by President Ranil Wickremesinghe to work with the World Bank to procure $200 million as means to support a social security project expected to be implemented by the government. The Social Safety Net project comes as part of measures proposed by the International Monetary Fund's EFF facility to implement a string of social safety programs to protect the most vulnerable people. The implementation of the proposed project is based on three components, namely financial assistance to target families, pilot program to improve opportunities for the poor and vulnerable, and strengthening the social security system. Meanwhile, the Cabinet granted approval to provide paying ward facilities in government hospitals for Sri Lankans as well as foreigners. Parliament approved the proposal presented by the President through the 2023 budget regarding the expansion of paid ward facilities in government hospitals throughout the island. At present, the National Provident Fund provides health insurance coverage to government employees and pensioners, and a significant number of citizens are entitled to other health insurance coverage. In the meantime, the Cabinet green light was also given to proceed with the proposal presented by the President to take necessary steps to introduce a new State Financial Management Act to be implemented with the 2025 budget, while simultaneously repealing the Financial Management Responsibility Act No. 3 of 2003. State financial operations are governed by the Financial Management Responsibility Act No. 3 of 2003 and subsequent amendments to that. The Act provides for non-compliance with the state's financial rules only with the approval for Parliament in extraordinary cases. However, the Act does not include provisions for deviating from those terms. The Act further does not specify the measures that should be taken in an event that the set goals cannot be met in accordance with the provisions of the Act. Taking these into account, the government has agreed to enact a new Public Finance Management Act under the International Monetary Fund's Extended Credit Facility Program. Now, India extended the deadline of its $1 billion credit line for Sri Lanka until March 2024. Even though the facility was due to end in March this year, officials had negotiated to extend the date. The Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, Priyantha Ratnayaka, stated that $350 million still remains as part of the Indian credit line. Reuters reported today that India has extended a $1 billion credit line for Sri Lanka by 1 year, giving the crisis-hit country backup funds to pay for essential imports. The credit line, part of about $4 billion in emergency assistance extended by India during the peak of Sri Lanka's financial crisis earlier, was scheduled to end in March. Speaking to Reuters, Sri Lanka's Deputy Treasury Secretary Priyantha Ratnayaka stated that the credit line was extended until March 2024 after negotiations. He added that there is about $350 million left out of the credit line that can be utilized as needed, and added that due to the increase of foreign exchange availability in the market, the need is not as keen as it was last year. Reuters reported in March that Sri Lanka was negotiating with India to extend the facility used so far, mainly for medicines and food. The situation has now improved, with Sri Lanka finalizing a nearly $3 billion bailout package from the International Monetary Fund in March and kicking off debt restructuring talks with key bilateral creditors India, Japan and China. Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves hit $2.7 billion at the end of last month. Now, Sri Lanka is due to have its first meeting with its bilateral creditors today since Japan, France and India set up a platform to discuss how the debt between bilateral creditors for Sri Lanka could be restructured in a transparent manner. As Sri Lanka's creditor nations prepare for their first meeting today to coordinate restructuring of the island's debt, the focus is turning to whether China will attend. The meeting within a new framework launched in Washington, D.C. in April that creditors hope will serve as a model to resolve the debt difficulties of middle-income countries is to be held online. Japan, which initiated the launch together with India and France, has invited all bilateral creditors, including China, though Japanese officials said it was uncertain whether it would join the talks. The reason was not immediately clear, although one of the officials felt Beijing could be weighing the merit of participation. Last month, France, India and Japan unveiled a common platform for talks among bilateral creditors to coordinate restructuring of Sri Lanka's debt. Sri Lanka owes $7.1 billion to bilateral creditors, according to government data, with $3 billion owed to China, followed by $2.4 billion to the Paris Club and $1.6 billion to India. The government also needs to renegotiate more than $12 billion of debt in euro bonds with overseas private creditors and $2.7 billion on other commercial loans. Sri Lanka has kicked off talks to rework part of its domestic debt and aims to finalize the deal by May. Now, the Met Department announced that a low-pressure area over the southeast Bay of Bengal will intensify into a cyclonic storm tomorrow. However, there is no direct impact to Sri Lanka as it is likely to move towards the Bangladesh-Myanmar coast. The Department of Meteorology in its weather forecast for today stated that showers or thunder showers are expected to occur at times in the western, Sabaragamuwa, central, northwestern and southern provinces. It further stated that several spells of showers will occur in the northern provinces. Showers or thunder showers are expected to occur at several places elsewhere over the island, particularly during the afternoon or night. Further, strong winds of about 40 to 45 km per hour can be expected at times over the western and southern coastal areas and along the western slopes of the central hills. As such, the general public is requested to take adequate precautions to minimize damages caused by temporary localized strong winds and lightning during thunder showers. In the meantime, speaking to First at 9, Director of Forecast at the Met Department Shiromini Jayawardena stated that the atmospheric disturbance that is within the Bay of Bengal causing the heavy rains in the country would develop into a cyclonic storm tomorrow. However, she stated that this will not have a direct impact on Sri Lanka as the storm is expected to move towards the coast of Bangladesh and Myanmar. Meanwhile, the National Building Research Organisation issued its first level of landslide warnings for the divisional secretariats of 6 districts. Accordingly, the warning announcement will be in effect for several areas in Badulla, Gaul, Kandy, Kegaul and Matale districts until 9:30 am tomorrow. And we'll be back with more news right after this short commercial break. Stay with us.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන්කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ටීමෝ වෙතින්. අත්වා ගැන ඔබත් විමසලිමත් වන්න.
Welcome back. Now, the key suspect wanted over the death of the 16-year-old schoolgirl in Kalutara was arrested today. The suspect was then taken to the Kalutara South Police and a statement was recorded pertaining to the incident. Meanwhile, the police stated that the medical report revealed that the deceased has not been raped.
The police stated that the 29-year-old suspect was arrested in Gaul early this morning by a team from the crimes unit of the Kalutara South Police. The arrested suspect has been identified as Danushka Gayan Sahabandhu, a 29-year-old resident of Isuru Uyana in Kalutara area. Investigations have revealed that the victim had visited the hotel with her female friend and her boyfriend, after which she was found dead on the railway tracks by the side of the hotel premises on Saturday. The young couple, which includes the victim's female friend, were initially arrested over the death, while the chief suspect was reported to have fled the area following the victim's death. The couple, including another 19-year-old schoolgirl and a 22-year-old young man, has been ordered to be remanded in custody until the 15th of May after being produced before the Kalutara Magistrate Court on Sunday. Police have also taken custody of the car in which they travelled to the hotel. Meanwhile today, the main suspect was then taken to the Kalutara South Police and a statement was recorded where he confessed that he had never met the victim before the incident and had no relationship with her. However, he had mentioned that 4 people, including himself, went to the hotel last Saturday and consumed liquor. The suspect has also confessed to the police that no sexual interaction occurred between the victim and himself, although they were in nude in the hotel room. In the meantime, the suspect's confession to the police also states that the victim responded angrily to a call received on her mobile phone with obscene words. He had further mentioned that the victim climbed on a chair near a window of the hotel room and jumped out of the window following the incident. The suspect had told the police that he was scared, which made him flee from the place. However, the police stated that they are conducting further investigations to confirm the veracity of the facts mentioned in the confession made by the suspect to the police. Further, the police mentioned that the medical report states that the deceased was not raped. Meanwhile today, the final rites of the deceased schoolgirl were performed at the Attavilla Public Cemetery in Kalutara.
Now, the current status of negotiations on the proposed Sri Lanka-Thailand Free Trade Agreement was discussed yesterday. The 4th round of talks on the proposed Sri Lanka-Thailand Free Trade Agreement was held in Colombo from the 27th to the 29th of March. Now, the President presented the progress of the discussions to the Cabinet for approval. Both parties have agreed to complete the negotiations and prepare the relevant agreement for signature by the first quarter of 2024 and hold the next round of discussions on the 27th and 28th of June in Colombo. The matters presented were taken into consideration by the Cabinet of Ministers. Now, USAID has made available its technical assistance for the restructuring of the energy sector and to develop the roadmap for the transition of the CB reforms. Taking to Twitter, the Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Vijayasekara, stated that he met with Arindam Ghosh, the assigned consultant and the USAID team this morning, and has been developed to the roadmap and assist in the reform process in the next 8 weeks. The Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Vijayasekara, expressed his gratitude to the USAID for their assistance in this regard. Now let's take a look at how Sri Lankan rupee traded against the other major currencies during the day. Now, the Colombo bourse ended lower today, weighed down by the energy and material stocks. The CSE All Share Price Index settled 0.18% lower at 8,914.74 points after 3 consecutive sessions of gains. The LOLC Finance and Cargills were the top losers on the CSE All Share Index, falling 1.9% and 3% respectively. Trading volume on the index fell to 28 million shares from 46.6 million in the previous session. The equity market's turnover fell to 667.8 million rupees from 885.2 million rupees in the previous session. Now, in the meantime, foreign investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 39.9 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading shares worth 657.4 million rupees. Now, oil prices fell today, relinquishing some of the gains of the previous 2 sessions, with the market cautious ahead of the US inflation figures for April, which will be key to the Federal Reserve's next interest rate decision. Brent crude was down 54 cents and $76.47 by 6:50 GMT. US West Texas Intermediate crude fell 50 cents to trade at $72.66 a barrel. Both contracts had settled up more than 2% in the previous trading session. The Fed raised rate hikes last week in what may be the last hike of its tightening cycle. It dropped guidance about the need for future hikes, with inflationary pressure starting to ease. In the meantime, the US Consumer Price Index figures for April are due tomorrow. A report from the New York Federal Reserve showed yesterday that US consumers said last month that they expected slightly lower inflation in a year's time. Oil markets fell sharply last week, while prices rose on Friday and Monday as fears of recession eased in the US, and some traders saw crude's 3-week slide on demand worries as overdone. Now, in a tit-for-tat move, China today expelled a Canadian diplomat in Shanghai after Ottawa told a Toronto-based Chinese diplomat to leave. China maintaining that Canada's unreasonable provocating led to the move.
Escalating tense relations amid concerns about Chinese influence in Canada, Canada expelled Chinese diplomat Shao Wei on Monday after an intelligence report accused him of trying to target a Canadian lawmaker critical of China's treatment of its Uyghur Muslim minority. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly said any form of foreign interference will not be tolerated. China has said it has never interfered in Canada's internal affairs and has no interest in doing so. China's Toronto Consulate General said the report on Chong has no factual basis and is purely baseless. In response to what China terms as Canada's unreasonable actions, Consul of Canadian Consulate in Shanghai, Jennifer Lynn Lolland, was told to leave China by May 13. Spokesperson at the Chinese Foreign Ministry Wang Wenbin said China adopted corresponding retaliatory measures in response to the Canadian side's unreasonable provocation. Wang added that if China did not heed Beijing's warning and continue to act recklessly, China will fight back resolutely and forcefully, and the Canadian side must bear all the consequences. Diplomatic tensions have been running high since the detention of Huawei Technologies executive Meng Wanzhou in 2018 and Beijing's subsequent arrest of 2 Canadians on spying charges. All 3 were freed in 2021.
And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Tune into our social media pages in the meantime to get the very latest updates. Have a pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.